very quickly, I'm going to do a product overview, not more than 2 or 3 minutes. And then I'll do a partial build of a nonlinear or state machine-based workflow. I'll then do a partial build of a dynamic approver workflow. And then finally, I'll show you a fully functional workflow that actually combines both of those techniques into something that you would see in the real world that you might build for yourself or for a customer. I'll finish off by talking about a couple of resources that are available to you to help you in these kinds of efforts. And then with whatever time we'll have left, we'll do a bit of Q&A. And if you want to stay late, a little bit past the time, I have no problem with that either. By the way, we have a pretty good attendance for this webinar, so it's entirely possible that we won't get to your questions in the time that we have, but they will be recorded automatically, and you'll also have the opportunity to pose questions at the end of your session. You'll have a small form, just a few fields. You can ask questions there as well. So if I don't get to it, I'll certainly get to it eventually. You will get answers. This is what our product roadmap looks like. You can see that with every major release of SharePoint, our products evolve along with it. And in 2010, we have Workflow 2010, which you're going to see today. We have Nintex Analytics, which is part of the reporting stream for SharePoint. It tells you things like what people are collaborating on your farm, what kind of documents they're accessing, what kind of activity you're seeing, how fast your content is growing. Essentially, it allows you to measure and manage the SharePoint environment and achieve the milestones and the ROI that you're looking for. Way up at the top there, you see an add-on for Workflow 2010 called Workflow for Project Server 2010. And this add-on gives you the ability to build automated processes, just like you're seeing or will see in Workflow 2010 for Project Server 2010. All the same integration, all of the same features, but for Project Server in addition to SharePoint. Now, for those of you who are still sitting on SharePoint 2007 and Workflow 2007, don't worry. Everything I'm going to show you in the next 25 minutes or so is entirely functional in 2007 as well as 2010. So there are features that are present in both. Just briefly, this is how we bring value with Workflow as a product. First, of course, is the ability to build simple to complex workflows that mirror your business processes. We do that in a way that allows not only the IT department but also the business users to make use of and consume the product. So it's not just about what happens in the IT department. Anybody can use it, and everyone does. Once all that automation is going on, you still need a way to monitor, manage, and reuse those processes, and we give you that too. An example of that would be the ability to identify bottlenecks in those processes, areas where you need to gain efficiency. We help you understand where you're losing that efficiency and how things can be improved. All of these things, of course, light up and extend SharePoint's capabilities. And the nice thing about that is that you have it already, most likely, or you're about to get it, and you're not going to have to run out and spend a lot of money on hardware. You're not going to have to learn a whole new application. In fact, your users and your IT department probably already know 80 or 90% of what they need to know to make use of the product. Finally, what we're striving for, what we want to evolve towards with our automation is the integration of our line of business systems. So things like CRM, all manner of back-end databases, whatever in-house applications that you may have built for yourself. a whole list of potential products out there that we can hook into, whether it's applications or data sitting in Office files like Excel spreadsheets or Word documents. All of that can be pulled in to your business processes, and it can be done in a drag and drop designer. Okay, that's my pitch. I'm going to actually, what I've got here is a team site that we're using to respond to expense claims. And we have two lists. We have a couple of web parts that are showing those lists here. The first is where the requests are received. We have columns for the amount that's being requested, a brief description, a column that shows us the approval status, and finally the cost center that's being applied to. We also have a list of potential approvers, and in addition to their names, we are listing what cost center they belong to and the approval limit that they can expense or approve in any one expense request. So I'm going to go into the request list, and I'm going to start building a workflow. What I'm going to do is create a workflow that is first received by the manager of the person who's submitting the claim. So we're not going to use the list of approvers for the moment. And I'm going to give that manager the ability to send it to another department, perhaps the finance department, for a more detailed review. So as you can see, I've started with a Flexi task. By default, that has an approve or a reject outcome. And I've dragged a couple of notification actions under each branch to let the initiator know the outcome. And I'm going to go into this Flexi task and give the manager an additional outcome that they can choose from. So we're going to call this outcome send for review. The manager will actually get 3 choices now, not 2. And if I wanted to, I have some nice tools here that I can use to make the notification a bit more descriptive, or perhaps insert information from the item that's being submitted into that email notification. They'll be able to click to respond to the action via a SharePoint page. But for now, I'm just going to leave things the way that they are. So no escalation or reminders or anything like that. I'm just going to stick with the default. Oh, sorry, I forgot to assign this to the manager. So rather than use the list of approvers, for the moment we're just going to specify manager in the address book in the lookup. And that's going to take the manager from Active Directory, the manager that's assigned to that particular user. But we have a lot of ways that we can choose those approvers. I'll drag over a request review action in case that's the option that the manager chooses. And we can see it's sort of falling together now. But there's an inherent problem with the way this is flowing. If the manager sends this to be reviewed, once that review completes, the workflow will continue on and end. So the manager is never going to get this review information back again to then make a decision. They make their decision once, and they never see that opportunity again. And that's not good. That's not what we want. So we're going to start using a state machine. So I'll stick this up at the top of my workflow. You can see that by default it gives us 2 possible states, but we can have as many as we want. And I'm dragging the Flexi task, or let's call this manager approval, to state 1, and I've dragged the request to state 2. And I'm going to open up this state machine action and give it a bit of configuration. Labeling, really. The first state will be manager, and the second state will be finance. And we're going to start with the manager phase. So far that's flowing the same way it did before. We're starting over here. If the manager chooses send for review, then I'm going to insert a change state action to send it over to the finance department. So again, still flowing the way it was before. We'll call this send to finance. And when finance finishes, rather than let this workflow continue on, I am going to send this back to the manager. So now we have a cyclical process. When this completes, the manager will be notified again that there's an action waiting for him or her. And the history of the workflow of the item in question will contain links to the review and the information that was gathered here. The manager can make a decision or can send it back again the second time for further information. So this is how we model that need to, or respond to that need to move backwards and forwards from department to department. In our example, we've only got 2 states, but this could be any number of states and any number of departments. And in fact, you can get quite clever about which state or phase you're going to move to next. Instead of just moving automatically to a set state like we did at the end of this review, this could be a conditional, there could be a bit of conditional logic here. So you could set up something like this where whether or not this resolves to yes or no, you can move to one state or the other. So you don't necessarily have to be locked into a pattern of moving from state to state. It can be determined at runtime. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you about state machines for now. I am going to start a new one and show you how we might choose these approvers dynamically. Now, if you recall, we have a list out there of potential approvers with some fields that map more or less to the fields that are coming through on our expense claims. So for example, we have cost center specified in our claims, and there's a cost center field associated with each approver. There's an amount specified in the claim, and each approver has a maximum approval limit that they can employ when they're granting these claims. So those are the values that we're going to be focusing on. So before we can assign an approval action for these claims, we need to gather the approver. And we're going to do that mainly with one single action. And the key to it all is the query list action. I'm going to query the approvers list in this site. You can see that we've got a drop down automatically of the lists that are available. And I'm going to gather the names of the approvers. I'm going to look in the approver field. So if I ran this as it is now, I would get every approver in the list as my result. So that's not what I want. I want to filter this down a little bit so that I'm only seeing items where the cost center is equal to the cost center in the item itself. So this cost center, these are all the fields in the approvers list, and we're going to look at the cost center for the item that is being submitted, which of course is the expense claim. So now I'm gathering all the approvers that match the cost center that our requester has specified in that claim. But I need to narrow it down a little bit further because not everybody will have the necessary limit to cover the expense. So I'm going to add another filter, and this time I'm going to look at the approval limit in that list, and I'm only going to choose people where that approval limit is greater than or equal to the amount specified in the item. So now I've only got people that belong to the same cost center and have the necessary limit to cover the expense. Finally, I'm going to order these from highest to lowest approval limit. And you're going to see why I did that in 1 second. There we go. Finally, I need to store this list of people in a variable. And because it may be multiple results that I get, I'm going to use a collection. Collections are simply multiple result variables. So we're going to call this potential approvers. Now we've got a place to store them, and we are done with this action. So the last thing I need to do before I assign the necessary approver to this action is pick them from the list. The reason I ordered all of those approvers from highest to lowest approval rating is so that I could pop the one at the bottom out of the list and use that one. It's going to be the one with the lowest possible approval rating that still meets our requirements. I'm going to pop that item, pop that approver off the bottom of the list using a collection operation. This is simply an action that allows us to manipulate collections or multiple results, and pops the last item in the list out and saves it in a variable. So if this is looking all scary and technical now, don't panic. Help is actually very, very good. It'll walk you through all of these things with screenshots and very plain language descriptions. You really can't go wrong. By the way, we're recording this too, so you'll have this webinar as a reference. So if you feel I'm going a little bit quickly, don't let it bother you. You'll be able to replay this at whatever speed you like. So we need to store this approver, this final approver, in another variable. We're going to call this one approver, originally enough. And it's only going to be one person, so we're going to store it as a person or group. Save that, store it here, and now we've got our approver. Now we're ready to assign the approver to the action. And if we check out our lookup, there's our workflow variables, and we've got an approver to choose from there. And there's our dynamic approver. Every time this expense claim process gets run, somebody will be taken from that list based on the logic we set aside. Just one example of many ways you can do it. We used a SharePoint list because, frankly, it's the easiest. If the information's in SharePoint, then your work, necessary work, is much less. But if you take a look at the integration section here of our canvas, pretty much all of these represent systems or data that we can access that we might use to make a decision about who should get an appropriate approval. You can query things like the SharePoint profile store, where you might have information on managers and such, or departments. You could query spreadsheets sitting inside of SharePoint. You could query CRM, just about any database you have, not just SQL, but Oracle, OLEDB, and ODBC as well, ODBC connections, even BizTalk server. So there's a whole lot of options that you've got here. And again, everything that I'm talking about here is available in 2007 as well as Workflow 2010, so don't feel that you're limited. Okay, I promised you an example of a fully functional workflow that incorporates both of these, so I'm going to show you that. Now, I'm sure it doesn't shock you that this is an expenditure approval process, much like the ones that I've been talking about. The difference here is that we're combining both and adding a little bit more logic. So this is a bit more indicative of what you might see in the real world. You'll recall that in that requests list where we store those expense claims, there's a column called approval progress. So we're using an update item action here to set that field initially to finding approver, to let people know what stage the workflow is up to just by glancing at the item that they've submitted in the list. We're then doing another query list action, just like the one that I showed you, to gather the appropriate approvers, but we have an extra little piece of logic here. We're running another collection operation, and we're counting how many results came back. We're doing that because if no results came back, if nobody is qualified, either doesn't belong to the cost center or doesn't have the necessary approval rating, then we're going to branch left. It's not going to meet the condition of being greater than 0. It's going to branch left. We're going to notify the submitter that their claim can't be processed, update the progress in the list with another update item action, and end the workflow. If there is at least one person that can respond, then we're fulfilling the criteria here. We're branching right. We're taking the first person in the list. In this case, we're using a get value here instead of pop. We're taking the first instead of the last, and if we open up this query list item, we'll see that we sorted the approvers in the reverse order this time, but no functional difference to what we did before. We're sending notifications, letting the submitter know that it's been assigned to an approver, and then we're kicking off a state machine, very much like the one that I showed you earlier. The difference in this approval process is that we've given, aside from some additional notifications and status reporting, we've given the manager a fourth option. In addition to reject, approve, and send to finance, we've also given the manager the ability to archive and approve an item. So we're simply copying the request or the list item into a separate list in SharePoint as part of the approval process. So if the manager wanted to have a record of this expense in a separate area in SharePoint, then he or she could do that. You might even get a little bit fancy and build this kind of archiving into the workflow process itself so it happens dynamically. You might have something conditional where if the expense is over a certain amount, then you copy the item. Another way to do it. Aside from that, everything is pretty much the same. We're using a change state action to send to finance if that's what the approver chooses to do. Another change state action brings it back. You'll notice that at the end of our state branches in our real-world example, we have more change state actions to end the state machine. As a general rule, you want to end your state machine whenever you're not going to change state anymore, so that you automatically progress down here to the next point in the workflow tree and you continue on. In this case, it's the last thing we do, so the workflow will end. Before I take some questions, I just want to show you a couple more slides, mainly your resources that you have available. There's a couple. Most important, from a technical perspective, is Connect. Connect.nintex.com is the online community that we host, and it has a tremendous amount of participants. We have tens of thousands of threads and many participants, including the dev team and the support team from Nintex itself. So these guys can help you out. The public can help you out. We can help you out. And you'll find a lot of information there in the form of downloads and documents You'll find white papers and tutorials on how to achieve some of the things that you're looking to do, much like we saw today. And you'll also find downloads of things like the SDK and various other little add-ins. So a very good resource. Definitely check that out. Another good one, of course, is the Nintex website. Now, this is going to be more commercial rather than technical for obvious reasons. But there's a couple of resources there that you'll still use in your efforts to build or implement workflows. One is the regional partner list. So if you need to set up some automation in your company, you need some help with it, then we have a whole list of partners there that can aid you in what you're trying to accomplish in your region, of course. You'll also find some really good examples on our website of real-world solutions that our partners around the world have built for their customers. They're almost like mini case studies. It's just a couple of paragraphs on the solution and another couple of paragraphs on the business benefit. And this can range from anywhere, anything like fixing streetlights in Holland to managing government legislation in New Zealand. It goes far beyond just the basic approve or reject this document. It gives you a nice little frame of reference, I think. Just to finish off before the questions, I'd like to let you know about the next webinar coming up. The next public webinar is in May and will focus on the imminent release of a new product called Nintex Live. And you can check out nintex.com/events for further information as it becomes available. Okay, great. We have a little bit of time left over. As I said, stay a little bit late as well. Just give me a moment here to sort through some of our questions. Unfortunately, I can't talk and read at the same time, so you're going to have to be a little bit patient with me just a moment. Okay, I have one question here. When you are in the state machine and edit a document in a state, what exactly happens then? Does the workflow rerun the whole workflow again? You have a choice when you configure your workflow to specify whether it starts when an item is edited or modified, or if it only starts when a document is created for the first time, or you can set it to start manually. So if you set it to start when an item is modified, you have to be careful because you do run into situations where you get the same workflow running on the same item twice. It'll run first when the item is created and uploaded for the first time, and then if somebody modifies that item, then you'll get a second workflow that runs, sometimes before the first one finishes. So you can run into those situations. There will be situations where you want that to happen, but it's certainly something that you should be aware of. Another question, where will we be able to access the recording for the webinar? That'll be emailed to you. You'll have an email that contains the link to the webinar itself, the recording, as well as the presentation deck that I've used today. Another question, can we generate custom forms? Yeah, absolutely. Let me show you, in fact, how easy it is. You can build your own. You can build your own InfoPath forms or ASP.NET forms and replace the default ones that users receive when they have actions that need to be, or tasks that need to be actioned. But we also help you with that a little bit by integrating with InfoPath. So if you open a user action, you'll see an Edit Task Form button here. And this aids you in building an InfoPath form. It actually opens a blank form, populates it with the fields that are required for the action that you're configuring, and then you can build that out yourself. You can add some graphics if you want. You can add some additional controls like, oh, I don't know, choose the next approver or something like that. We're just saving you a little bit of time. I can also tell you that Nintex is investing fairly heavily in the form space. So can't give you a whole lot of details yet. You'll hear about it very soon, but there will be some new things happening in that area soon. All right, let's see. We have a few more questions that have come through. When a workflow is in progress for an item, can the workflow be changed? So it can. The workflow can certainly be changed, but the workflow that is already running, or the instance of the workflow that is partially completed, will continue as it was originally created. So the modifications that you make will be in effect for all the subsequent workflows that are started after you made that modification. Can I add more fields to the InfoPath form? Yeah, absolutely. So you can add as many fields as you want, and you can add as many controls as you want. Is it possible to run parallel actions or branches asynchronously? Yep, it is. I can show you that right now. So I showed you a synchronous version, the state machines, but an even more common one is parallel actions. So under logic and flow, we've got parallel actions here, and if you wanted to have something where while an approval was taking place, you might want to have another department carry out a series of tasks while that's going on. They're not dependent on each other, but we know that both have to happen before we get to the next stage in the business process, so we run them here under a sequence of parallel actions. And of course you can have as many branches as you want here. You can have 5 or 6 or 10 or 12, it doesn't matter. Let's take a few more. If you're not using InfoPath, do you have to create the forms externally and then import these in? Yes, the answer to that is yes. Here's a good one. Can the workflow read the data from an Office document? Yes, it can. It can. That Office document needs to be in SharePoint. And you have a couple of options there. One option is using Query Excel services. So this action allows you to look at any spreadsheet that's sitting in your SharePoint library, and you can retrieve as many values from a cell as you want, and you can update those cells as well. So effectively you can perform dynamic calculations using those spreadsheets in addition to just pulling information out of them. Or you can populate them automatically instead of a person doing it manually. Now with SharePoint 2010, we've seen an evolution in Word services, and Nintex Workflow 2010 takes advantage of that. If you have a Word document sitting inside of SharePoint, we can read fields out of that document, update those fields, or update the document itself from a template, and we can even convert it to a different file format like Adobe, a PDF, I should say, perhaps a legacy version of Word maybe. So you can certainly interact with those Office documents as well. Can I see whether it is possible to view the execution of the workflow from the user side especially the approval task. Yeah, sure, we can do that. I can give you a look at what that email looks like from the user's point of view. While I'm doing that, I'll show you how a user can find what actions they need to respond to as part of their workflows. So here on the home page of our portal, we have two web parts. We've got My Workflow tasks that show any actions that are outstanding that we need to respond to. And we have another web part below it that shows the status of any workflows that we've started but are not necessarily involved in. If we want to see the visual progression of where those workflows are up to, we can simply click on the current action and we'll get a visual representation of where that workflow is up to. That's where we're sitting now. We've been asked to specify a callback time to talk to a customer, and we have a button here that we can click that brings us to the form that we use to respond to the workflow. In addition to these web parts, we can also work from email. So we'll receive notifications, typically like this, with links that we can click that will bring us to a SharePoint page to that same form that I just showed you, so you can action it through a browser. Now, you have another option using what we call lazy approval. You can actually respond to the email with simple language, and you can add some commentary if you'd like, and email it through. And that will actually be processed by our system. It goes to a mail-enabled document library in SharePoint. It picks up those keywords and it actions the workflow on behalf of the person who's responding. So it means that you don't even have to be connected to the SharePoint farm. You can be doing it from an iPhone or Windows mobile device, whatever you happen to be using. If you're email connected, then you can participate. And you don't even need to have an Active Directory account to access the farm, because you're never accessing the farm, you're never accessing SharePoint. So just about anybody could be involved. All right, I'm going to take a couple more, and then I think we may call it a day. Let's see what I've got here. And again, I've got some good questions here that I haven't got to yet. I will get to them. Your questions will eventually be answered. Question, is this the enterprise version of Nintex Workflow? Yes, it is. And I'll give you a very brief idea of what the difference is between the versions. A lot of the integration actions that you see here, such as the CRM interaction, the Excel services query, the BizTalk server query, and others, are enterprise features. You will get the web service call, you will get the database query, and some of the others as well with the standard and workgroup features. The provisioning tools that allow you to create user accounts and manage permissions and create Exchange mailboxes are also part of the enterprise version. Just bear with me, I've got a fairly long question here that I'm working through. A question here about serial approvers and whether or not it's necessary to separate out those serial approvers into separate states to be able to send it back to the first person. So I think I've got the gist of this question. I'm going to attempt to to answer it. If I don't answer it successfully, then just drop me an email, or better yet, just fill out that little form at the end of your session, and I'll make sure that I explain myself. Let's add a third state. So I'm going to set up what I think was your question. One approver, and then we've got a set of serial approvers, one after another. And I think what you're asking is, do we need to separate these guys out into separate states if we ever want to move back to the first one? Sort of. So let's take this as an example. We're going to start with this guy. So we're going to set this to begin at state 1. If he approves it, we'll move over to state 2. Now what we want to know is if we get down, let's say here or here, do we need another state to move back over here? You can insert change states in the middle like that to move over here. Well, sorry, you wouldn't do that. You would do it here. So in this case, if this approver approves it, we're going to move on to the next approver. If he rejects it, we have a choice of what state we can move to. We can either go back to the first person, or maybe we can move them over somewhere else. So you don't necessarily have to split these guys up. You can have change state actions embedded in a particular state. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, then we'll sort you out, don't worry. Okay, I'll take one more, and then I'll let you guys go. I'm happy you're all here. I'm happy you stayed this long, but I think we're going to have to cut it off in a couple of minutes. Okay. Oh, here's a good one. When a workflow is started due to the creation of a list item, can we make some of the fields of the list read-only? Yeah, definitely. In fact, that's a very popular implementation. Usually what happens is that once somebody submits something, like an expense report, then you don't want that person to go back and change it a week later or a couple weeks later, or however long it is after they've submitted it. So you want to change the fields of their own item to read-only, effectively taking away their ability to modify it once they've submitted it. So that's actually quite easy. We have a set permissions action that we can use to do that, and you can set the items on the set the permission on the item that's being processed. Okay, great. Well, I can see that the next webinar we're going to have to leave a few more, a little bit more time left for questions. It's nice to have such a high volume of attendees and good questions. They were all very good questions, so thank you. And please feel free to ask more in the form that you'll see when you finish your session, and give us any other feedback that you'd like on the webinar itself. A reminder, the next one, as I said, is going to be all about Nintex Live, and the exact date will be announced very shortly. It'll happen sometime next month. Thank you all for attending. It was great to have you with me, and I will see you at the next one.